I know that it's the beginning of May, but please tell me that you know why I'm wearing my Halloween shirt. We're halfway to Halloween. We are 6 months away. Can you believe I just learned that right now? But here on this channel, it's Halloween all year round anyways. I mean, I keep up my little pumpkin lights. My dear friend Harold sits here all year round. I would never put you in a storage bin, no. If that sounds like the vibe for you, then join our cult. We've recently passed the threshold of 20,000 followers, and soon I believe that I will have enough followers to march into battle and take over the world. Do you like morbid improv? Join the cult of Haunted Hippie today. Be my little maggot, be my victim, etc. etc. Now that you've taken care of that and you've hit the like and the notification bell, now I can let you know why I've gathered you all here today. April has been a pretty wild month for horror, and thank God, because it's been a pretty dry year. Not only is a brand new season of Yellowjackets airing, but we got 4 brand new horror movies in theaters this month. And we're going to talk about all of it, starting with the TV shows. Then I'll get into the short list of non-horror movies that I watched in the month, and of course this includes new releases like Super Mario Bros. We will get into my horror rewatches of the month, which again is a short list, but includes movies like The Autopsy of Jane Doe. Then we will talk about my new watches of old horror movies, so finally getting caught up on movies like Hansel and Gretel Get Baked. Bet you could take a guess which day of the month I watched that one on. Then finally what you're probably waiting for, all the new releases, and there are timestamps down below if you want to just skip ahead. But we need to talk about movies like Renfield, The Pope's Exorcist, Living with Chucky, and more. So as I said, let's kick things off with all the TV shows that I watched. I rewatched The Haunting of Hill House for the first time since it came out 5 years ago. I can't believe it's been that long just because I feel like I remember the pop cultural impact of its release like it was yesterday, but I'm not going to cover that today because I am doing a big deep dive on Mike Flanagan this month. So moving on for now, I watched another few episodes of Prehistoric Planet and I love this show. The man, the myth, the legend, David Attenborough narrates this nature documentary that takes place on prehistoric Earth. I love dinosaurs. I love that we have the technology to kind of explore how they lived like we do with modern day nature documentaries. I'm so happy! Oh my god, season 2 was just announced, so that was the footage that I used for the B-roll over the synopsis. I'm so excited. And David Attenborough is still narrating. Bless him. I think he's like 93, 96 years old, and we are still being blessed with his beautiful voice in these nature documentaries. Anyways, just thought you should know. Bye. I know that in 20 years, this will all be proven wrong because of new theories that come up, but whatever. Highly recommend. Another show that I cannot recommend highly enough on Apple TV is Severance, which I've already talked about a lot last month. Severance follows office workers who have elected to split their consciousness. One of their personalities only exists at work and the other only exists outside of the office. The first season follows these workers as they strive to find the truth behind their company. If you want to hear me talk more in depth about this trippy show, then check out the video that I did on TV to movie comparisons. I shared a bunch of horror TV shows that I've watched and then I paired them with horror movies that go well with them to give you guys a bunch of new recommendations, which included recommendations paired with Wednesday, which I also rewatched in April. My mom wanted to watch it and I was more than happy to rewatch it. I love existing in the world of Nevermore. I thought it was just as much of an escape the second time around, and I really hope that we don't have to wait like 2 years for the next season like Stranger Things. And speaking of a season 2, Yellowjackets, yes, I have been keeping up with it. Season 1 established the accident and the girls making their way in the wilderness, but season 2 puts them further to the test as we follow the girls trying to survive the winter. I love this show. I feel like I was a bit more taken by season 1 than I have been with this season, but it's definitely escalated. Things have gotten grosser, more intense. I'm loving how all the dynamics are building with the characters. I still maintain it's one of the best shows that have come out in the past few years. The last TV show that I watched in April is Beef, which is the new drama comedy starring Steven Yeun and Ali Wong. Two strangers get into a road rage incident that drastically alters the course of their lives. I really enjoyed this show. I think it's one of the most genuinely funny original shows we've gotten in years. The last episode is by far my favorite of the entire season, but the whole thing is littered with hilarious moments. I think Ali Wong really shines with the comedy, but Steven Yeun feels like the true star of the show to me. You get to see his entire range of capabilities in just this show, and his character started to feel so real to me. A24 only really began producing TV shows within the last few years, and this really excites me. I think it's a good indicator that we'll probably get more really high quality streaming shows from them. It almost gave me a Mike Flanagan vibe because at its core, it's very, very focused on its themes, on family values and relationships in general, but it exists under the guise of being a comedy, whereas Flanagan's shows exist under the guise of sort of being horror shows. Beef also had a few elements of being a thriller to me. I think there were a couple moments sprinkled in here and there that actually felt like horror too. I think it genre bended in a really unique way where it all worked. You're taken on a roller coaster ride. I felt like every episode was crucial to the development. I didn't feel like any of it was fluff. So highly recommend checking out Beef if you haven't yet. That will do it for TV shows. Now the first non-horror movie of the month is actually also a rewatch. Palm Springs, a 2020 sci-fi comedy that stars Kristen Milotti and Andy Samberg. This follows two people as they get stuck in a Groundhog Day situation, reliving a wedding day over and over. This is a damn near perfect movie to me. I adore it so much. It's definitely up there as one of my actual favorite movies of all time. I don't think there exists a more tender sex scene than the one in this film. It is extremely nihilistic, so if that's not your thing, you might not be on board. But essentially, the whole thing boils down to finding someone to ride out the meaningless void of life with. My rings! How do I forget them again? Every time with my goddamn rings. I start going and then I'm like, oh, why do my hands feel naked? I don't know. Yes, life is monotonous and it's full of people that we just don't like, and sometimes it feels downright pointless. But luckily, most of us will find that one person that makes it all kind of feel worthwhile. So hold our hand as we try to make meaning out of an existence that is so futile. And how love at its core is about having fun. How that should be the goal of existence, to enjoy it. It's such a beautiful movie while also being pretty crass and also having some understated humor. I think all around it is really funny. It's the best thing that Andy Samberg has ever done, besides maybe Hot Rod, but I wish that his career looked a little bit more like this. What's absolutely dog shit though is that it's only streaming on Hulu. It doesn't have a physical release. The only one that I could find was in Spain, so no USA regional Palm Springs Blu-ray for me, I guess. And unless I ever shell out for Hulu Premium, I'm never gonna get to watch this movie without ads. Anyway, moving on, Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves is up next. A charming thief and a band of unlikely adventurers embark on an epic quest to retrieve a long-lost relic, but their charming adventure goes dangerously awry when they run afoul of the wrong people. I like that the Google synopsis is written in that eloquent fantasy speak because the dialogue in the movie isn't even written that way, with the exception of Regé-Jean Page's character, which yes, he shows up for a little bit. It was fun. I like to see the return of fantasy to pop culture, even if I don't know the first thing about D&D. It was a solid 3-star movie, the kind that you go out and you see and you're entertained, but you basically forget everything about it by the time you get home. I found a few moments really funny. I actually got choked up at one point too, which I guess means that I did like these characters, even if the movie was pretty low stakes despite it being quite fantastical. I don't know that that should be the standard that we expect from a theatrical fantasy release. Like, I would hope that I could expect something a bit more meaningful, but there's been a bit of a trend with big brand movies lately. Super Mario Bros. Is the other one you could probably have guessed that I felt really similarly about. You already know this is about Mario and Luigi as they navigate the magical realm of the Toads, Bowser, Princess Peach, Donkey Kong, and more. Having played Super Mario Bros. On the Wii for many years growing up, I did appreciate all the Easter eggs. They were littered all over the movie. You already know that Jack Black was amazing as Bowser as well. He is the only thing anyone can talk about from this movie. The only other positive about this movie is that I saw it in the Dolby Cinema, and so the sound was incredible, the picture was bigger and better, my seat was kind of shaking a bit with the noise. That was awesome, but that's about the extent of my appreciation because everything else about the movie was pretty bad. The rest of the voice acting was absolutely awful. You know that I love Anya Taylor-Joy, but woof. The only thing that she did was put on an American accent. There was no attempt at any kind of inflection, nothing. Same thing with Chris Pratt. He was just Chris Pratt. He wasn't Mario. It was like there was no actual voice acting attempted. Seth Rogen was alright as Donkey Kong, but I think it's just because these filmmakers had the wherewithal to make sure that they squeezed in a few classic Seth Rogen laughs in there. I don't know how much they bribed him to do that, but God bless. I had the same disconnect with Toad and Luigi. I like Keegan-Michael Key and Charlie Day, but they should not have been Toad and Luigi in this movie. It was bizarre. I don't feel like any of the actors in the movie ever played those games a day in their life or did any research for that matter. There's also no story at all. There's like nothing to latch on to. And people say, oh, it's fine. It's a movie for kids. Like, like they don't care. Okay, may I point you to a little known company called Pixar, who has made some of the best movies in cinematic history, period, and those are all predominantly marketed towards children too. Why is there like this imaginary standard that filmmakers set, like this super low bar where they're like, yeah, we can just throw slop at children? As long as there's just pretty pictures on the screen, keeping their eyes glued to it, then that's all that matters. Children deserve better, in my opinion. All of the effort of this movie went into, of course, the beautiful animation and cramming in as many Easter eggs as possible, and it just feels like no effort went anywhere else. I think Illumination needs to step its pussy up. I did do a whole Patreon video getting more in depth with Super Mario Bros. And Dungeons and Dragons though, if you want to check that out, it's linked down below. The last non-horror movies to discuss today are Twilight and New Moon. Don't worry, I won't get into my ceaseless tirade about this movies. Instead, I will get into something much more embarrassing. I have a crush on a boy! And that is who I'm showing this franchise to. We've been playing drinking games along to the movies. Can't recommend this enough, by the way. It is the only real test to determine whether or not you should keep dating someone. Can you get trashed to the Twilight movies together and laugh together when Edward is crouching in a tree or when he's acting like Bella smells like hot garbage? If the answer is yes, the next step is marriage. No, I'm just kidding, but we had a blast. The only problem is the drinking games are a little bit too good. By the time you hit the hour and 15-minute mark, you're done. So you're blitzed. So we have not yet successfully played the drinking game throughout the entire duration of the movie yet. We always kind of bail on it because at a certain point you're so drunk that you just forget. The goal in May is to make it through the entire drinking game while watching Eclipse and Breaking Dawn. It was also just the right time to get back into the franchise with the announcement of the TV show. It cannot be recreated for so many reasons I won't even get into, but nothing they do with this show will ever be as powerful as these films. So it felt like an appropriate time to dive back into the movies, and it was just as I suspected. They have an irreplaceable vibe, and Stephanie Meyers can kiss my ass. Because I swear to God, if they have to fight to get people of color into the TV show again, or if she tries to cram in her bullshit pro-life views again, like I said, she can kiss my ass. Enough talk of broody magical beings, let's get into my horror rewatches of the month. Starting with Scream 6, I went to see this in theaters for a third time because why not? Who knows when I'll get to do that again. It has remained a 3.5-star film for me. All of my issues and obsessions still remain. I also rewatched the first 4 Final Destination movies because, again, I'm putting my new love interest through lots of hoops and tests. I need to know, can you laugh at the sheer absurdity and randomness of death? And so far the answer is yes, like it's getting so real. And it's embarrassing for me because for a long time I kept telling myself no more boys, they never work out. They're bad, boo, stinky. Let me find myself a nice girlfriend for once or a non-binary partner. But no, these men keep coming out of the fucking woodworks and I keep falling for it. This one is different though, I think I might keep him. It's gotten to the point where I'm talking about him on YouTube. Let me shut up. The Autopsy of Jane Doe is my next rewatch. A coroner and his son conduct an autopsy on a Jane Doe murder victim and find increasingly bizarre clues. I love this movie. It's all about the vibes. It's not one of the strongest horror movies ever made, but I love the sort of slow burn atmospheric feel to it. Also the fact that Olwen Kelly was able to remain still and be a living prop for this movie. Get fucking real. She makes the movie. It would not have worked if they used a prop body. The fact that it's a real human body on the table creates this feeling of dread that just would not have been possible otherwise. Because yes, hyper-realistic prop bodies exist and they work wonders, but for a movie where the focus is all on the body, like the realism is so important. It's also very important when you consider the mystery that gently unravels. If you know, you know. I think it deserves a little bit more credit, maybe a little bit more attention. It's a solid 3.5-star movie. I only docked it a few points because I feel like there are some kind of cliched horror elements in there, but I feel so immersed by this film, I think that it will always uphold its rewatch value. I also rewatched Oculus, but again, that is a topic for another day. So with that, it's time to move on to my new watches of old horror. Bad Milo is up first, a 2013 dark comedy. A stressed out man discovers that a tiny demon is living in his intestines, and that excessive anxiety causes it to jump out and kill the people responsible for stressing him out. If you want to hear the real ramble about butthole demons and flopped expectations, then join us over on Patreon. I gave this movie its own complete review over there, so so I'm not gonna get too much into it today. But the gist is that it did not meet expectation. I love a good stupid movie, and this just was not stupid in the right ways. The CGI blood was also a really big downer, although I do like that the butt monster was done practically. The good news is that it's free to watch on Tubi, because I know that no matter how much I tell you that I was underwhelmed, some of you will not be deterred. And I would feel the same way. I'd be like, butthole monster, sign me up. All I can do is try to prepare you for some disappointment and just ask that you trust me. Absentia was another first time watch for me, but again, that will be saved for a Mike Flanagan deep dive. The Box was my next new watch. This was a Blu-ray that I received in the mail recently. A suburban couple, Norma and Arthur, face a moral dilemma when they're gifted a box. This box contains a button which they can push and receive $1 million. The kicker is that if they make this choice, someone somewhere will die. Sounds interesting, right? Stars Cameron Diaz and James Marsden, two of America's sweethearts. It's not good at all. It's like one of the biggest fever dreams of a movie I feel like I've ever experienced. I cannot believe that it came out in 2009. I would have believed you if you told me that it came out in 1999, because this has never been in my consciousness. I had never heard of it before I got it in the mail. So imagine my shock and horror when I learned that it made $33 million in the box office. I feel like I've been zapped with a Mandela effect wand, because I'm like, there's no way this came out in 2009 and I didn't know about it, but a bunch of people went to go see it. I don't know how to explain this movie, like how it made me feel. It had the shiny quality of a dream, and I've used this example before, but it sort of feels like the type of movie you watch at 2 a.m. at a sleepover when you're 12. Like, was that actually real? Was it a real memory? Was it a dream? One of those movies for me personally was Haunter, starring Abigail Breslin. I actually went and I rewatched that movie last year just to make sure that it was actually real. It was, and it was sadly way worse than I remembered. Anyway, that's it. I don't have any other insights about the movie. It's long and it's boring and it's weird. James Marsden and Cameron Diaz also have like no chemistry together as a couple, and it's very weird how they're trying to put on these southern accents. So enough said. What did I watch on 420, you may be asking? Hansel and Gretel Get Baked. You probably saw that coming from the intro. A brother and sister fall prey to a witch who lures teenagers into her home with a special strain of marijuana. Also worth noting, this movie stars Michael Welsh, our beloved Mike from the Twilight franchise. I never realized his name was also Mike in real life. I have a 420 tradition that we've held for the past 3 years where I hop on a Discord call with my friends from across the pond. Seb, Leanne, and I light up virtually together, and then we choose a 420 themed horror movie to watch for the first time. Last year we watched 420 Massacre, which I actually highly recommend. I found that movie super enjoyable and cute. And this year, of course, we went with Hansel and Gretel Get Baked, which was more or less a huge disappointment. It did have a few moments that made me completely belly laugh, but those were pretty few and far between. But the second act is so god-awful because we completely abandon our main characters in favor of following the subplot of this gang. There's absolutely no balance between the storylines. There's just this really jarring shift away from our main characters. Also, it's frankly boring. Like, we'd been following these characters for the entire first act, and then you expect me to care about this gang? I'm like, what movie am I watching right now? So that one will not be going on a top 10 stoner horror movie list for me. Luckily, we can now move on to one of the biggest categories of the day, new horror releases. Living with Chucky is up first, which is a new documentary on Screambox. I don't feel like the synopsis of this documentary on Google is accurate, so I'm making up my own. The first half of this hour and 40-minute long documentary is basically just a recap of the franchise with a few new behind-the-scenes videos. The latter half is about what it was like growing up with your dad as the head puppeteer or whatever he did for this franchise. I'm gonna keep it real. This documentary is very bad. If you are a super casual fan, then this documentary might be great for you. But if you're a big enough horror fan to purchase Screambox monthly, I don't think that I would color you as a casual horror fan. I don't even have Screambox. I just keep signing up for free trials. The most frustrating thing about this documentary is that it has no depth behind all the topics that it brings up. I'm not kidding you. It literally recaps the franchise in its entirety. As if, like I said, a huge horror fan would be in need of something like that. It fails so drastically at understanding its audience. I don't know, it kind of pisses me off. There's also no theme. Typically, documentaries are created with some form of like a journalistic intent. There is no actual insight or resolution to be found here. It would be different if this filmmaker had really dug deep and really kind of exposed what it was like to grow up at the center of a pop cultural phenomenon like this. But I have a hunch that she didn't really. Okay, maybe you grew up with some famous family friends, but she even admits while interviewing a bunch of the actors that she had never met them before interviewing them.
I set out to meet all these people surrounding the franchise whose names had been a big part of my childhood, but I never had the chance to meet.
And she's like, oh, it's crazy. I can't believe like we're finally meeting. It's about time. time. And they're like, yeah, child of the man that did the effects on this movie, sure. So it leads me to believe that, like, okay, you didn't actually grow up in this franchise. Like, your dad went to work and you stayed home and maybe were, like, vaguely aware of it. You weren't on the set. Like, you don't actually have anything to offer here. Even the interviews she conducted were really shallow, and so everyone basically came to the conclusion and said in various terms, like, oh yeah, we all became a family on those sets. There was just no journalistic edge, no inclination to dig deeper into this franchise. Just nothing of interest at all. So in short, this documentary has no reason to exist. The end. Renfield is up next, and fortunately, I have much more positive things to say. Renfield is essentially a direct sequel to Dracula, where we follow Renfield as he unlearns the abusive brainwashing imparted on him by his boss Dracula. Dracula? Back in my day, Dracula was the scariest monster in the cinemas. Renfield was great. It was my favorite release of the entire month. I am a slut for a dark comedy. I am a downright whore for a good gory laugh. And this movie actually had pretty much my entire theater laughing. And you wouldn't believe who also found this movie to be a riot. My dad loved Renfield too. If you want to know all of his thoughts on the movie and also on the Pope's Exorcist, we did a long Patreon video discussing those movies. But the absolute highlights of this movie are Nicolas Cage and Nicholas Hoult. Oh, two Nicholases, look at that. They're both hilarious. I love them to death. Oh my. Nobody could have filled these roles better, especially Nicolas Cage, who is never phoning it in. It doesn't matter if it's National Treasure or Willy's Wonderland, that man commits to the bit, and it's no different here. But Nicholas Hoult had me cracking up as well. There's this one moment where he like helps out this group of people, and there's some nuns there, and they're like, oh, thank you. And he's like, oh, you're welcome. That, I was like crying laughing. I don't know why. We also know that from the menu, he plays a sniveling little man very well. But this is almost like the continuation of that character where he actually goes through an arc that we would have liked to see Tyler go through. I also thought that Awkwafina was pretty funny. I know she's not very well liked, but I thought that she did well here. Her subplots got complicated, but they were not afraid to say fuck 12 in this movie. Down to the production design too, because I noticed there was a poster in the office that said something like, don't log the crime until it's overtime or something to that effect. The production designer knew that cops will delay filling out the paperwork until it's overtime so they can make time and a half on our dime. Shh, don't tell them that I told you that. So naturally, her subplot was also about how she was the only one brave enough to try to dismantle the system from within. It follows her in a precinct where literally every cop had been bought out by her very powerful enemy. One of the absolute best people in this movie, though, that I was so surprised to see was Ben Schwartz. I used to quote Jean-Ralphio pretty often because I would always quote him saying, she's the worst! And he basically plays Jean-Ralphio in this movie too. I'm obsessed. I'm bummed that this movie didn't perform that well, and apparently it didn't do much for too many people, but it's my new favorite movie of the year. Or I should say my favorite horror release of the year so far. The Pope's Exorcist, not so much, but that is the next movie we have to talk about today. Father Gabriel Amorth, chief exorcist for the Vatican, battles Satan and innocent possessing demons. A detailed portrait of a priest who performed over 100,000 exorcisms in his lifetime. Google, I don't know that that's the most accurate description, but close enough. I went into this movie with the lowest of low expectations because I have beef with exorcism movies. I think they can f*** right off. This movie, however, had Russell Crowe riding around Rome on a Vespa. His Italian accent was impeccable, his Italian and his Spanish were great, and he was really funny. I was genuinely laughing at him. I didn't realize he had this kind of performance in him, and all the standard exorcism stuff happens, which I think is lame, but what was unique and captured my interest was how they explored the history of the Spanish Inquisition. This may be the first exorcism movie I've ever seen that's so blatantly anti-Catholic. They really took this opportunity to expose some of the darkest history of the church, but I think they could have taken it farther in my opinion. It was kind of an odd choice given how campy the rest of the movie was, but I appreciated the choice nonetheless. It was a 2-star movie for me, but that's a pretty high rating for an exorcism movie coming from me. Now up next would be Beau is Afraid, which I already gave a 35-minute long dedicated review. Go check that out if you're interested. I will say it's not my favorite review I've ever done because I was so reluctant to actually talk about that movie, because it's just one of those movies where it's like, it's just completely Ari Aster's artistic brainchild, and it's not really a matter of the movie being good or not, it's just whether or not you can get on board. And I just happen to not like it. It just is what it is. My next new watch would be Kids vs. Aliens, which is a new Shudder original. When Gary and Samantha's parents head out of town, an all-time rager of a teen house party turns to terror when aliens attack, forcing the siblings to band together to survive the night. I'm really bummed that this movie wasn't very good because if you couldn't tell, it has a pretty similar vibe to Christmas Bloody Christmas. That movie was so good and so stylish, we found it worthy of being nominated for Best Cinematography at the Oscars this year. Kids vs. Aliens had a pretty similar effect, and I'm inclined to believe that it was also shot on film given the look. I also know that it's a spin-off of one of the short films in the VHS franchise, and I couldn't tell you which one because I do not keep up with that franchise. The only one that I've seen is VHS 84. But knowing that now, I can't imagine they expanded very much on whatever was in that short. The story especially is very lackluster. There isn't much of one there. I think the characters are also basic as hell. There is fun style, and there are some practical aliens, but if that's all you're looking for from this movie, I don't even know if there's enough of that there for you. That was pretty much why I watched it. I was like, I want to see some cool, fun, practical, bloody aliens. And there are some cool moments, don't get me wrong, but they're very few and far between. It was just sort of a nothing burger in my opinion, but if you do have Shudder, I don't feel like it would be a total waste of time to check it out. It's kind of funky and different. Evil Dead Rise is up next, and yet again, I must point you to some other content. I gave this movie a solo review, which I'm pretty sure made my channel grow like crazy, so if you're one of my new little maggots from that video, then welcome. Go check that out, and also the replay of the live stream that I did with my dad where we ranked the franchise and had a spoiler discussion of it. Also, if you're watching this from the future, like the magical little fairy that you are, my deep dive of the Evil Dead franchise is also probably ready for you to check out. I made an Evil Dead playlist as well if you want to check out all of the Evil Dead content on my channel. So finally, for the last movie of the day, which would be Swallowed. It's listed as a 2022 horror film, but it was just released to video on demand. After a drug run goes bad, two friends must survive a nightmarish ordeal of drugs, bugs, and horrific intimacy. I wanted to like this so bad because it's a queer film and it hits on a lot of queer themes, but it was just so boring. If you want my full in-depth thoughts, then I am gonna record a full review of that for my Patreon. So I'm just gonna briefly summarize my thoughts here. I was so excited because the director of The Ruins was partnering up with Jenna Malone yet again, and I had pretty high expectations because I really like The Ruins, but also because this was Mark Patton's return to horror. I've literally never seen him in anything else besides Nightmare on Elm Street Freddy's Revenge, and I'm sure that a lot of you could probably say the same, right? And now he's out and he's participating in a very openly queer film. If you know his story from the release of Freddy's Revenge, you know that he's been through it. So it's really exciting to see him all these years later really just embracing his queerness and being involved in this movie. However, this movie just never lives up to its potential. In fact, on Letterboxd, I said that the poster has more energy in a single image than the entire movie has in its entire runtime. The movie keeps suggesting that it's going to become an outright body horror film, but it never does, and I feel like that's the only thing it could have done to have become more interesting. It just never does. It's a tease. It's like stuck in the foreplay zone. The highlights for sure are definitely Mark Patton and Jenna Malone, who gives stellar performances, but it's just not enough to carry this movie, so I would recommend passing on Swallowed. Like I said, I will speak about that movie much more in depth on Patreon, and that being said, it's time to thank these wonderful people. These are my patrons without whom this content would not be possible. They keep this channel funded and ensure that you guys get to enjoy all these free videos. And in return, I produce 4 to 6 bonus videos every single month. Typically for every main channel video, there is a Patreon video as well. If that's not for you, the rest of my social media is linked down below. If you haven't subscribed and clicked the notification bell yet, then I highly recommend that you do so that you don't miss my upcoming deep dives. I'm diving into the Evil Dead franchise, the It franchise, and Mike Flanagan all within this next month, so stay tuned. Let me know what I should put on my watch list for this month, and hopefully that will show up in my next recap. More than anything, I hope that you enjoyed this video and that I catch you in the next one. Bye! Bye!